So, picture this. It's just another quiet Tuesday morning on the human colony of New Haven, and honestly, it couldn't have been more peaceful. You know those small frontier worlds where everybody knows everybody? That's exactly what New Haven was like. The kind of place where kids could run around without parents worrying, where the biggest excitement was usually someone's birthday party, or maybe a new shipment of chocolate arriving from Earth. The adults were all off doing their thing at the mining facilities, about 40 miles out. See, New Haven wasn't just some random settlement. It was built around these massive mineral deposits that Earth needed for their starship construction. So every morning, like clockwork, the grown-ups would hop on the transport shuttles and head out to work the mines, leaving the colony quiet except for the essential staff and, of course, all the children. Now, the kids weren't just lounging around. They had their daily learning sessions in the community center, this big, bright building right in the heart of the colony. Picture about 237 children, ages 6 all the way up to 16, sitting in different groups based on their age. The little ones were learning basic math and reading, while the older kids were studying things like colonial engineering and off-world agriculture. It was actually pretty amazing how organized they had everything. The 16-year-olds, kids like Tyler and Jessica, were practically young adults already, helping teach the younger ones and learning advanced skills they need when they turned 18 and officially joined the workforce. The middle kids, maybe 10 to 14, were the rowdy bunch, always asking questions, always curious about everything. And then you had the little ones, 6 to 9 years old, still wide-eyed about living on another planet, still asking if they could see Earth through the windows. What made this Tuesday even more routine was that it was supply shortage week. See, New Haven got supply runs from the main shipping lanes once a month, and they were running a bit behind schedule. This meant most of the colony security personnel had been reassigned to help with rationing and distribution duties. The automated defense systems were running on minimal power to conserve energy, and the few guards left were more focused on keeping peace during the supply shortages than watching the skies. That's when these Zephyrian slavers made their move. And let me tell you, these weren't some random pirates looking for quick cash. These aliens had done their homework. They'd been watching human colonies for months, studying patrol schedules, learning about supply runs, figuring out when each settlement was most vulnerable. The Zephyrians had these sleek, predatory-looking ships that could bend light around them, complete invisibility from any human sensors. They dropped out of hyperspace like ghosts, moving in perfect formation toward the colony. Their intel was spot on about the timing. Security was at its lowest. The adults were away, and all those valuable human children were conveniently gathered in one location. The attack happened so fast that most people didn't even realize what was going on. These paralysis fields just suddenly activated. Imagine invisible waves that make your body stop working instantly. 1 second the kids were laughing and learning. The next second they were frozen in place, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything except watch in terror as these alien figures materialize around them. The Zephyrians moved with military precision. They had portable stasis pods ready to go, and they worked methodically through the community center. Little Amy, who'd been raising her hand to answer a question about Earth's history, suddenly found herself being loaded into a pod like a piece of cargo. Jake, who'd been helping his younger sister with her reading, couldn't even reach out to protect her as they both got taken. But here's the part that'll really get your blood boiling. This wasn't some random kidnapping for ransom money. The Galactic Council, that big political body that's supposed to keep peace between all the different alien species, had recently published this scientific study declaring human children to be the most adaptable beings in the known galaxy for something called consciousness transfer experiments. What does that mean exactly? These sick aliens have figured out how to rip a person's mind, their memories, their entire personality, right out of their brain and stick it into someone else's body. And apparently, human kids were the best subjects because their brains were still developing and could adapt to the process better than adults. So these Zephyrian slavers weren't just planning to sell these children as workers or servants. They would go to auction off their minds to the highest bidder. Rich alien psychopaths who wanted to live forever could buy a human child's body and consciousness, essentially stealing their entire life and future. The Zephyrians loaded up all 237 kids and took off, probably congratulating themselves on the biggest payday in their species' history. They had no idea they'd just crossed a line that would change everything in the galaxy forever. Captain Tom Bradley was having what you'd call a perfectly boring day when everything changed forever. His fleet was doing routine patrol duty in the Kepler system, 3 jumps away from New Haven. The kind of mundane assignment that usually involved checking shipping manifests and making sure pirates weren't bothering the trade routes. Bradley had been a fleet captain for 12 years, and honestly, he was looking forward to nothing more exciting than his evening coffee and maybe catching up on some reports. Then the communication array started screaming. The distress signal came in fragmented, cutting through the usual background chatter of deep space communications like a knife. Most of it was garbled static, damaged transmitters, emergency power, the usual mess you get when a colony's communication system gets hit hard. But through all that electronic noise, 2 words came through crystal clear, and they hit Bradley like a physical blow. Children taken. Now, you have to understand something about human space communications. There are protocols for everything: pirate attacks, equipment failures, natural disasters, you name it. But there's one particular emergency code that every human in the military knows by heart, one that gets absolute priority no matter what else is happening. Code 77 Alpha, Crimes Against Children. Bradley's communications officer, Lieutenant Davis, went white as a sheet when she heard it. Her hands were actually shaking as she tried to clean up the signal to get more details. But the emergency beacon from New Haven kept repeating the same basic message over and over. Massive attack. Children missing. Send help immediately. What happened next was something the galaxy had never seen before. Bradley immediately activated the emergency fleet network. Think of it like a panic button that connects every human military vessel within communication range. Within minutes, the call was bouncing from ship to ship, fleet to fleet, spreading through human space like wildfire. And the response? It was absolutely unprecedented. Captain Riley's merchant marine convoy was 3 days into a supply run to the outer colonies. The moment they got the alert, they dumped their cargo containers right there in space and started burning toward New Haven at maximum speed. Admiral Johnson's heavy cruiser squadron was conducting training exercises near Earth. They abandoned the drills immediately and jumped to hyperspace without even waiting for official orders. But it wasn't just the military ships. Civilian vessels started joining the convoy. Transport captains, freight haulers, even personal yachts belonging to wealthy business owners. If it had a human crew and could make the journey to New Haven, it was coming. By the end of the first day, there were over 300 ships heading toward that little frontier colony. The crews on these ships, they weren't just following orders anymore. This was personal. You could see it in their faces, hear it in their voices over the communication channels. These were parents, uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters who understood that somewhere out there, 237 human children were in the hands of alien slavers. Sleep became optional. Meal breaks were forgotten. Every engineer was pushing their engines past safety limits, and nobody cared about the risk. Meanwhile, something even more dramatic was happening in the halls of galactic politics. For decades, humans have been the diplomatic species on the Galactic Council, always pushing for peaceful solutions, always trying to find compromises, always willing to talk things through rather than fight. Other species sometimes joked that humans were too soft, too willing to bend over backwards to avoid conflict. Ambassador Wilson had built his entire career on being the reasonable voice in council debates. He was famous for his patience, his ability to find middle ground between hostile alien factions, his commitment to peaceful resolution. Alien diplomats respected him precisely because he represented what they saw as humanity's greatest strength, the ability to choose cooperation over aggression. But when Wilson walked into the emergency council session that day, he was a completely different person. The other ambassadors could sense it immediately. There was something cold and final in his posture, something that made even the warrior species representatives uncomfortable. His statement to the council was delivered in a tone so icy it made the chamber temperature seem to drop. Our children have been taken. As of this moment, humanity is suspending all treaties, all trade agreements, and all diplomatic relations until every single child is returned unharmed. Any species found harboring these slavers, providing them aid, or refusing to assist in their capture will be considered an enemy of the human race. Then Wilson did something that shocked everyone in that chamber. He walked out. No negotiations, no discussions, no diplomatic back and forth. Just a simple statement of fact, and then silence. The alien representatives sat there in stunned confusion. This wasn't how humans were supposed to behave. Where were the endless committee meetings, the requests for mediation, the careful diplomatic language designed to avoid offense? For the first time in galactic history, the other species began to realize that maybe they didn't understand humanity as well as they thought they did. Maybe all that diplomacy and cooperation wasn't weakness at all. Maybe it was a choice, and maybe that choice could be revoked. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really like when someone threatened their children. Here's something that shocked the entire galaxy. Humans have been running one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks in known space, and most alien species had no clue it even existed. While everyone thought humans were just focused on trade and diplomacy, they'd actually been quietly building connections in every dark corner of the galaxy for over 50 years. See, when humanity first joined the galactic community, they realized pretty quickly that being the new kids on the block meant they needed to know what everyone else was really up to. So while the politicians were shaking hands and signing treaties, human intelligence agents were making friends with information brokers, building relationships with smugglers, and basically creating a web of contacts that stretched from the core worlds all the way out to the lawless frontier territories. The moment news about the missing children hit the intelligence networks, it was like watching a sleeping giant wake up. Agent Rebecca Stone, who'd been undercover as a cargo inspector on Nexus Prime for 3 years, suddenly activated every contact she'd built in the criminal underworld. Commander Jake Murphy, who everyone thought was just a retired merchant marine running a small freight business, revealed he'd actually been coordinating intelligence operations across 12 star systems. Within hours, every smuggler's den, black market bazaar, and criminal hideout in the galaxy had grim-faced humans showing up with briefcases full of credits. And we're not talking small money here. These agents were authorized to spend whatever it took. A Vraxian drug dealer who usually made maybe 10,000 credits a year suddenly had humans offering him $1 million just for information about recent Zephyrian ship movements. The criminal underworld had never seen anything like it. These humans weren't playing games or trying to negotiate prices. They walked into the most dangerous cantinas in the galaxy, sat down with alien crime bosses who could literally eat them alive, and calmly explained that they needed information about missing children. The message was always the same: help us find these kids, and we'll make you rich. Get in our way, and you'll regret it for however long you have left to live. Now, most criminals are pretty good at reading people, and what they saw in these humans scared them more than any weapon. These weren't desperate parents making emotional pleas. These were professionals who'd gone ice cold, operated with a kind of focus intensity that made even hardened killers nervous. Word spread fast through the criminal networks. Don't mess with the humans right now. They've gone completely insane. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a Kethri trader named Vex who ran a small operation, moving questionable cargo through the Outer Rim. Vex was the kind of guy who minded his own business and tried to stay invisible, but he'd seen something that made his blood run cold. 3 days ago, he'd been docked at Terminus Station when a whole fleet of Zephyrian ships had come in, and he'd caught a glimpse of what they were carrying. Terminus Station was basically the galaxy's most notorious criminal hub. Imagine if you took every pirate, slaver, murderer, and psychopath in known space and gave them their own space station. It was supposedly neutral territory where even the worst criminals could do business without interference, protected by some seriously nasty defense systems, and run by crime families so powerful that even legitimate governments left them alone. When Vex nervously approached a human agent with his information, he was expecting maybe a few thousand credits for the tip. Instead, they handed him enough money to buy his own space station and promised him permanent human protection if his information led to the children. Vex had never seen that much money in his life, and he spilled everything he knew about Terminus Station's layout, security systems, and current criminal residents. Admiral Mike Harrison's task force, which had grown to over 300 ships, immediately changed course toward Terminus Station. But here's where things got really interesting. Other alien species who've been watching this whole drama unfold suddenly realize they might have completely misjudged humanity's military capabilities. Those civilian freight haulers and merchant vessels that had joined the rescue fleet, they started dropping their outer hull plating to reveal weapon systems that made even the Krogan war fleets look like toys. Turns out those harmless human cargo ships have been carrying concealed military-grade firepower this whole time. Energy cannons that could punch through battleship armor, shield generators more advanced than anything the Council had on file, and electronic warfare systems that could hack into supposedly secure alien networks. Captain Lisa Davis's special forces were preparing for what everyone knew would be the most critical rescue mission in human history. But when other species got a look at her team's equipment, they started asking uncomfortable questions. How long had humans been developing this technology? How many of their civilian ships were actually disguised military vessels? And most importantly, what else were humans hiding? The Turian military observers were especially shaken when they realized that human stealth technology was apparently decades ahead of anything they developed. The proud Asari, who considered themselves the galaxy's intellectual superiors, started questioning how they'd missed such obvious signs of human military advancement. Suddenly, every alien government was scrambling to reassess their intelligence files on humanity, and what they were finding made them very, very nervous. It looked like humans had been playing the long game all along, quietly building capabilities, while everyone else assumed they were harmless diplomats and traitors. The galaxy was about to learn that when you threaten human children, you don't just wake up their protective instincts. You wake up capabilities that most species never knew existed. When Admiral Mike Harrison's massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Terminus Station system, every criminal in that godforsaken place knew their world was about to change forever. You have to understand, Terminus Station had been the galaxy's criminal headquarters for over 2 centuries. This wasn't just some pirate hideout. This was a fortress that had repelled attacks from entire alien armadas and survived attempts by 3 different galactic governments to shut it down. The station itself was a monster. Imagine a small moon covered in weapons platforms, shield generators, and defensive systems that had been upgraded and reinforced for generations. The crime families who ran it had spent fortunes making sure it was absolutely untouchable. Energy barriers that could stop planet-killer missiles, automated defense turrets that could track and destroy entire fleets, and enough firepower to make most military forces think twice about getting too close. But as Harrison's fleet moved into attack formation, something became crystal clear to everyone watching. The humans weren't intimidated at all. While alien observers expected to see the typical pre-battle negotiations, demands for surrender, or at least some hesitation, the human fleet just kept moving forward with terrifying confidence. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a normal battle came when human electronic warfare specialists started their assault. Those supposedly impregnable defense systems? They began shutting down one by one as human hackers tore through security networks that had taken decades to build. The crime lords watching from inside the station couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their most advanced firewalls were being bypassed like they were children's toys. Within the first 3 minutes, half of Terminus Station's automated defenses were offline. The energy barriers that had stopped countless attacks just flickered and died as human ships transmitted override codes that shouldn't have existed. How did they know the station's security protocols so intimately? The answer was simple. Human intelligence agents have been gathering this information for years, patiently mapping every system, every weakness, every possible vulnerability. The Zephyrian fleet that was docked at the station tried to mount a defense, but they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to predict their every move. Human ships move with surgical precision, targeting specific systems on Zephyrian vessels before the aliens could even get their weapons online. It wasn't random destruction. Every shot was calculated to disable rather than destroy, because the humans needed information about where exactly the children were being held. Captain Rodriguez, commanding one of the human battle cruisers, later described it as the most one-sided fight he'd ever seen. The Zephyrians were trying to fight a conventional space battle, but the humans were playing an entirely different game. While the aliens focused on big ships and heavy weapons, human forces used smaller, faster vessels that seemed to appear out of nowhere, strike with devastating accuracy, and then vanish before return fire could even be targeted. The real shock came when the station's commander, a notorious crime boss named Vorthak, tried to play his final card. He opened communication channels to the human fleet and announced that he had the human children in a secured section of the station, rigged with explosives. His message was supposed to be a bargaining chip, a way to force the humans to back down and negotiate. That's when Admiral Harrison's voice cut through all communication frequencies with a message that sent chills through every criminal in the galaxy. His tone wasn't angry or emotional. It was a kind of cold, calculated voice that made seasoned killers nervous. You have 30 seconds to release every child unharmed, where you'll learn why every species in this galaxy fears humanity when we're truly angry. What happened next became legendary. Human boarding pods, launched with pinpoint accuracy, began cutting through the station's hull in dozens of locations simultaneously. These weren't random attack points. Each breach was precisely positioned based on detailed intelligence about the station's internal layout. Captain Lisa Davis led the primary rescue team through corridors that she navigated like she'd lived there for years. The speed and efficiency of the rescue operation left even hardened criminals stunned. Davis's team moved through the station like ghosts, neutralizing threats without causing collateral damage, securing corridors with tactical precision that military academies would study for decades. They used non-lethal weapons wherever possible, advanced medical equipment to check on unconscious defenders, and coordinated with surgical timing that made the whole operation look almost effortless. Meanwhile, human medical teams were right behind the combat specialists, immediately checking on each rescued child, providing trauma care, and ensuring that nobody was seriously injured. The children who'd been kept in stasis pods for days were carefully awakened and given immediate medical attention by specialists who'd been preparing for exactly this scenario. The Zephyrians who survived the assault found themselves in a situation they'd never imagined possible. These weren't vengeful humans looking for blood. These were professionals who completed their mission with almost mechanical efficiency. The surviving slavers were secured, documented, and prepared for transport to human justice systems, all while being treated according to strict humanitarian protocols. By the time those 17 minutes were over, Terminus Station's criminal empire had collapsed, the children were safe, and the galaxy had witnessed a display of human military capability that would reshape interstellar politics forever. The message was clear: threaten human children and face consequences beyond your worst nightmares. The transport ships carrying the rescued children back to New Haven were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. These weren't just military vessels doing a job. Every single crew member, from the ship captains down to the engineers, treated those kids like they were their own family. The medical teams worked around the clock, not just checking physical health, but providing counselors and trauma specialists who understood exactly what these children had been through. When the ships finally touched down on New Haven, the entire colony was waiting. Parents who'd spent days not knowing if they'd ever see their children again were reunited in scenes that had grown adults crying tears of relief. But here's what really got at people. It wasn't just the parents of New Haven who showed up. Humans from dozens of other colonies had traveled across space just to be there, to help with the recovery, to show these kids that the entire human race had their backs. Little Amy, who'd been frozen in terror when the paralysis fields hit, was back to raising her hand in class within a week. Jake, who tried to protect his younger sister during the attack, found himself being hailed as a hero by kids across human space. But the real miracle was how quickly these children bounced back, supported by counselors, their families, and a community that wrapped them in love and protection. However, while the children were healing and getting back to their normal lives, the political landscape of the entire galaxy was being turned upside down. The Turian Empire, which had always considered humans to be junior partners in galactic affairs, suddenly found their military advisors recommending major changes to their defense treaties with humanity. The Aseri, who'd always been politely condescending about human simplicity, started requesting detailed briefings about human military capabilities. The Krogan, a warrior race that prided itself on being the galaxy's toughest fighters, began approaching human commanders with something that looked suspiciously like respect. General Thane, the most decorated Krogan military leader in recent history, was overheard telling his staff that humans might just be the most dangerous species in the galaxy precisely because they've been hiding their true capabilities behind diplomatic smiles for so long. But the biggest changes happened in the Galactic Council chambers. For decades, the Council had operated on the assumption that humans were the reasonable species, the ones who could be counted on to compromise, to find middle ground, to avoid conflict at almost any cost. Suddenly, every alien government realized they'd been completely wrong about human nature. The restructuring was swift and dramatic. Trade agreements that had been heavily skewed against human interests were quietly renegotiated. Military alliances that had treated human forces as support units were rewritten to acknowledge humanity as a primary power. Species that had been dismissive of human territorial claims suddenly became very interested in establishing better diplomatic relationships. The Zephyrians faced consequences that serve as a warning to the entire galaxy. Their homeworld government, terrified of facing the same fate as Terminus Station, issued formal apologies and paid reparations so massive they basically bankrupted their entire economy for a generation. But even that wasn't enough to repair the damage. Human space became permanently closed to any Zephyrian vessel, and most other species followed suit, not wanting to risk association with child slavers. The Zephyrian military, once considered a respectable mid-tier force, found themselves unable to recruit allies or purchase advanced technology. Their own people began questioning how their leaders could have been stupid enough to threaten human children. Within a year, the government that had authorized the slave raids had been overthrown, and the new leadership spent most of their time trying to convince the galaxy that they'd learned their lesson. Admiral Harrison's final report on the operation became required reading in military academies across known space, but one line in particular became legendary. When asked to summarize the entire operation, Harrison wrote simply, "They threatened our children. There could be no other outcome." Those 9 words became the most quoted military statement in galactic history, because they perfectly captured something that other species were just beginning to understand about humanity. The rescue operation itself became the ultimate cautionary tale, whispered about in the darkest corners of space, wherever criminals gathered. The story grew in the telling. Some versions claimed the humans had destroyed entire fleets in minutes. Others suggested they had secret weapons that could crack planets. But the core message was always the same. If you want to stay healthy in this galaxy, never, ever threaten human children. Young alien criminals who thought they were tough learned to avoid any scheme that involved humans. Experienced pirates started including warnings in their crew briefings about steering clear of human colonies. Even species that had never directly interacted with humanity began teaching their children about the importance of treating human young with respect. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity that would shape interstellar relations for generations. Behind all that diplomacy and cooperation was a species that would literally move heaven and earth to protect their children. And once you crossed that line, there was no negotiating, no compromise, no second chances. There was only the consequences, and those consequences were more severe than anyone had ever imagined possible.